In the 1990s and the early 2000s, the world was built on a single, unwavering foundation. If it processed data, it had Intel inside. This wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was a geopolitical reality. Intel held a monopoly that would make the oil barons of the past look like street vendors. They controlled the architecture of the personal computer, the server rooms of every major bank, and the digital infrastructure of every government on Earth. Their dominance was so absolute that it bred a dangerous type of corporate psychopathology. They didn't just compete, they dictated. Intel owned the foundries, the designs, and the roadmap. They operated on the tick-tock model, a rhythmic mechanical delivery of innovation that the rest of the world used to set its own clock. Every 2 years, a new manufacturing process. Every 2 years, more transistors, more power, more profit. They were the apex predator of the high-tech jungle, and their silicon throne seemed carved from mountain stone. In their eyes, they were the undisputed Silicon King. In 2005, a man named Steve Jobs walked into the Intel headquarters. He was building a device that would eventually destroy the world as we knew it, the iPhone. Jobs wanted Intel to design and manufacture the processor for this top-secret project. It was the ultimate invitation to define the mobile era. But Intel's CEO at the time, Paul Otellini, looked at the numbers and saw a niche. He calculated the cost of development against the projected sales of a high-priced, unproven phone. He decided the margins weren't there. He thought the volume would never justify the engineering overhead. So, Intel said no. They let Apple walk out the door and into the arms of ARM architecture and Samsung's foundries. Intel gambled that the world would always want a desktop PC more than a pocket computer. It was the most expensive no in the history of capitalism. By the time they realized their mistake, Apple had built its own silicon empire, and the mobile world had changed. While Intel slept, the very physics of their business began to rebel. The game of silicon is the game of shrinking transistors, moving from 14 nanometers down to 10, then 7, then 5. It is the most complex engineering feat in human history. Intel had always won because they owned their own factories, but their integrated device manufacturing model became a trap. As the nodes got smaller, the errors got bigger. Their 10-nanometer process, which was supposed to launch in 2015, was delayed for years. While Intel's engineers were drowning in manufacturing failures and yield issues, a quiet giant in Taiwan was perfecting the art. TSMC didn't design chips, they only made them for others. They focused on one thing, mastering the nanometer. Because TSMC worked with everyone, Apple, Nvidia, Qualcomm, they had more data, more capital, and more experience. Intel was fighting a war on two fronts, design and manufacturing. TSMC was only fighting one. Slowly, the lead evaporated. Intel's crown was slipping behind the foundry wall. The final blow didn't come from a new titan, but from an old rival that Intel had left for dead. AMD was on the brink of bankruptcy in 2014. But under Lisa Su, they made a radical clinical decision. They stopped trying to be like Intel. They spun off their factories and became fabless. They focused entirely on design and outsourced the manufacturing to TSMC. This allowed AMD to leverage the world's best manufacturing process, while Intel was still stuck trying to fix its own broken factories. Suddenly, AMD's chips were faster, more efficient, and cheaper to produce. In the server market, Intel's most profitable fortress, the walls began to crumble. For the first time in decades, Intel wasn't the fastest. They weren't the most efficient. They were just the most arrogant. The outsourcing model had won, and today, the surrender is absolute. The autopsy of Intel reveals a terminal case of the Incumbent's curse. They protected their existing margins so fiercely that they ignored the future until it ran them over. They believed their past success was a guarantee of future dominance. They mistook a monopoly for a talent and a foundry for a shield. In technology, if you aren't willing to cannibalize your own business, someone else will do it for you. Intel still exists, but the aura of invincibility is gone. They are no longer the gatekeepers of the digital age. They are a legacy player fighting for air in a world defined by the rivals they once mocked. The lesson is clinical. Arrogance is the most expensive liability on your balance sheet. The silicon graveyard is full of kings who thought they were too big to fail. Stay lean, stay paranoid, because the architecture of the future never stops moving.